Snow fell relentlessly over Seoul, swirling in the wind like a million frozen needles. Outside the frosted glass of the exclusive lunar lounge, Kavira pressed her gloved hands against her swollen stomach, trying to share what little warmth her body had left with the life growing inside her. She was 8 months pregnant, her heavy gray turtleneck and black coat barely enough to keep the sub-zero temperatures from seeping into her bones. Through the window, she could see him. Marcus, the man she had supported through his every failure, now celebrating his first major success. The club was a golden sanctuary of warmth, smelling of expensive cognac and cedarwood, a world away from the sidewalk where the slush was beginning to soak through Kavira's boots. She had been waiting for 2 hours. She didn't have much money left, having spent her last savings on a small gold tie clip to celebrate Marcus's promotion. She had imagined a quiet night, perhaps a soft conversation about the baby's future, but when Marcus finally glanced toward the door and saw her, his face didn't soften with concern. He didn't rush out to pull her into the heat. Instead, he looked at her with a tired, irritated sneer that made her breath hitch in her throat. Kavira watched as he said something to his friends, making them laugh, before he finally stepped toward the heavy oak doors. When he opened them, the warmth hit her face for a fleeting second, but Marcus didn't let her in. He stood in the doorway, blocking the light. "You're home," Kavira said softly, her voice trembling from the cold. "I brought you something. I thought we could go home together." Marcus didn't even look at the gift in her hand. He looked at her dark skin, pale with cold, and her large pregnant belly, then looked back at the high-status crowd behind him. "Seriously, Kavira? You're embarrassing," he snapped, his voice cutting through the wind like a blade. "Look at you. You look like a mess standing out here. I'm trying to celebrate, and you're showing up like a charity case." The words stabbed her heart. Her hand shook as she held out the small box. "I just wanted to see you. It's freezing, Marcus. Please, I can't feel my feet." "I don't care," he shouted, loud enough for a few people inside to turn and stare. "You're always dragging me down with your needs. I'm done with this. I'm done with you." He grabbed her black coat by the shoulder, not to pull her in, but to shove her back onto the icy pavement. "Get out of here, Kavira. Find somewhere else to be." "Daniel, please," she gasped, stumbling back, her boots slipping on a patch of black ice. "It's a blizzard. Think about the baby. Go find his real father then," Marcus sneered, oblivious to the truth of the child's lineage. He stepped back inside and slammed the heavy door. A moment later, the security guard engaged the electronic lock. Through the glass, Kavira saw the lights in the entryway dim as Marcus walked back to his table, laughing as if she had never existed. The cold hit Kavira like a physical blow. Snowflakes landed on her long hair, melting into the blonde highlights before freezing again. Her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps as she hugged her stomach, her black gloves useless against the biting wind. She looked at the closed door, her heart breaking into 1,000 jagged pieces. She waited for the door to open, for him to realize he couldn't leave a pregnant woman in a storm, but the club's music only grew louder, thumping against the glass. Her feet felt like lead as she began to shuffle down the street. Each step made her sink deeper into the mounting drifts. She had no family in this country, no friends who would take a call this late, and her phone had died in the cold. People hurried past her, tucked into their scarves, heading home to warm beds and family dinners. Warm yellow lights spilled from every apartment window, but to Kavira, the world had become a dark, empty void. Her mind kept replaying his final words over and over. "Embarrassing. Done with you." She didn't understand how the man she gave everything to could discard her like trash on the most dangerous night of the year. As she reached the corner of a darkened alley, the wind cut through her gray turtleneck, stealing the last of her strength. Her vision began to blur into a haze of white and gold. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the frozen stone steps of a silent, black-painted building. Her tears mixed with the snow, freezing on her cheeks. She whispered a final, desperate prayer for the child inside her, her eyes fluttering shut as the darkness of the soul night finally pulled her under. The cold was no longer a sensation. It was a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed against Kavira's chest. Her breathing, once shallow and frantic, had slowed to a jagged rhythm that puffed white against the darkness. Every inch of her skin felt brittle, as if it might shatter like the ice forming on the Han River. She clutched her stomach, her black gloves stiff with frost, trying to shield the tiny life inside her from the cruelty of the night. She was a ghost in the snow, a shadow moving through a city that had turned its back on her the moment the club door slammed shut. Her boots dragged through the deepening drifts, leaving messy, uneven tracks that the wind quickly erased. She reached the edge of a high-walled courtyard where a line of sleek, black sedans sat idling, their exhaust pipes spitting plumes of gray smoke into the air. The low hum of the engines was the only sound in the deadened night. Kavira reached out, her fingers brushing the cold metal of a car door to steady herself, but her legs had finally reached their limit. The strength left her all at once, a sudden and total surrender of the muscles. She sank to her knees, the slush soaking instantly into her black coat, before her body tilted sideways against the stone steps of the building's entrance. The world began to narrow into a small, blurry circle of light. She could see the snowflakes dancing in the glow of a street lamp, beautiful and indifferent. Her eyes started to drift shut, the exhaustion of the pregnancy and the trauma of Marcus's betrayal finally pulling her into a dangerous, seductive warmth. She was so tired of fighting to be seen, so tired of apologizing for her own existence. The heavy, reinforced doors of the building suddenly groaned open. A wave of heat and the scent of expensive tobacco spilled out, followed by the heavy thud of boots on stone. "Wait, what is that?" A voice barked in Korean, sharp and clinical. Kavira couldn't open her eyes, but she felt the vibration of footsteps approaching. Two men in dark suits stepped toward her, their shadows falling over her pale face. "Is she a beggar?" one asked, his tone laced with irritation. "Move her before the boss sees. We don't have time for this." A rough hand gripped Kavira's shoulder, shaking her with a lack of care that made her head loll back. She let out a soft, broken whimper, her fingers curling instinctively around her belly. "Stop." The word wasn't loud, but it possessed a terrifying gravity that caused the air to go still. The hand on Kavira's shoulder vanished instantly. A new set of footsteps approached, slow, deliberate, and heavy with authority. The very atmosphere of the street seemed to shift, the wind losing its bite as a presence far more formidable took its place. Taesung stepped into the light, his black overcoat opened to reveal a dark turtleneck that framed a face of carved granite. He was a man accustomed to looking at the world and seeing only things he owned or things he intended to break. But as his sharp, predatory eyes fell upon the woman collapsed in the snow, his composure fractured. He saw the curve of her stomach, the blonde highlights in her dark hair, and the diamond ring on her hand that caught the dim light. He stopped breathing for a single, thundering second. It was her. The woman from the summer. The one whose laughter had haunted his quietest nights, and whose disappearance had left a void even his empire couldn't fill. "Boss, we'll clear her out right away," the guard stammered, bowing low. Taesung didn't look at the guard. His eyes were fixed on Kavira's trembling lips and the way the snow was beginning to bury her. A dark, violent rage began to simmer in his chest, not at the woman, but at the world that had allowed her to fall this far. "If you touch her again, You lose the hand, Tae-sung said, his voice a low, lethal silk. He moved then, discarding his own pride in the watchful eyes of his men. He knelt in the frozen slush, his expensive trousers soaking through, and reached out with a tenderness that shocked the guards into silence. He brushed the hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her ice-cold skin. Kavira, he whispered, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in months. Who did this to you? She didn't answer, her consciousness slipping away into the gray, but as he slid his arms beneath her, one supporting her head and the other cradling the weight of her pregnancy, she felt a change. The biting wind was gone, replaced by a wall of solid, radiating heat. For the first time since the winter began, the cold couldn't reach her. Tae-sung stood, lifting her into his arms as if she were the only thing of value in the entire city, and turned back toward the golden light of the doorway. She stays with me, he commanded, and find out who let her freeze. I want a name before the sun rises. Before we go further, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more of this. It means the world to me, and don't forget to tell me in the comments section where you are watching from. The transition from the lethal cold of the street to the interior of the black sedan was instantaneous, but the air inside the car remained thick with tension. Tae-sung sat in the back seat, the heavy weight of Kavira's limp body across his lap. He ignored the way the melting slush from her coat ruined his bespoke wool trousers. His focus was entirely on her face, the way her long dark hair, streaked with gold, fanned out against his arm, and the frightening blue tint of her lips. As the car's high-powered heater began to roar, Tae-sung pulled her closer, his large hand resting instinctively over the swell of her stomach. The moment his palm touched the curve of her belly, he felt it, a faint, rhythmic thrum of life, a defiant kick against the palm of his hand. The air in his lungs vanished. The math of the months since they had last seen each other flashed through his mind with lightning speed. The night at the Han River, the shared secrets, the sudden disappearance, it all converged into a single, staggering realization. This wasn't just a woman he once knew. She was carrying his blood. The only heir to the Tae-sung name was currently freezing to death in a wet coat because of the incompetence of the men he paid to be vigilant. A dark, suffocating quiet descended over the car. The driver caught Tae-sung's eye in the rearview mirror and immediately looked away, his face pale. He had seen that look before. It was the look that preceded a storm from which no one survived. Drive, Tae-sung commanded, his voice a low, vibrating growl that seemed to rattle the windows. Go to the penthouse. Call the private medical team. If they aren't there when we arrive, they will be out of a job and a life. As the car tore through the snow-clogged streets of Seoul, Tae-sung looked down at Kavira. He thought of the guards at the club, the men who had watched her shiver, the men who had planned to move her like she was a piece of discarded trash. The rage that had been simmering in his chest boiled over into a cold, focused fury. When the sedan pulled into the private, high-security underground garage of his residence, the doors were flung open by a team of panicked security personnel. Tae-sung didn't wait for them. He stepped out of the car, carrying Kavira with a protective grip that dared anyone to move toward her. Two guards stood by the elevator, the same ones who had been on duty at the club's perimeter earlier. They bowed low, their voices shaking as they tried to greet him. "Boss, we didn't know." One started, his head down. Tae-sung stopped in front of him. The motion was so fluid it was almost beautiful. Without releasing his hold on Kavira, Tae-sung lashed out with a single, heavy boot, catching the guard in the chest and sending him flying back against the concrete pillar. The sound of ribs snapping echoed through the quiet garage. "You saw a woman dying in the snow, and you thought of your schedule," Tae-sung said, his voice devoid of any emotion, which was far more terrifying than a shout. You saw my bloodline struggling for breath, and you thought she was a beggar. He leaned in closer, his shadow swallowing the second guard, who had dropped to his knees in terror. Consider yourselves fortunate that I am occupied with her life tonight, Tae-sung whispered. If she so much as sneezes because of the cold you left her in, I will ensure you never feel warmth again. Get out of my sight. If I see your faces on my property after tonight, you will become part of the Foundation. The guards scrambled away into the darkness, leaving a trail of fear behind them. Tae-sung turned back to the elevator, his gaze softening only when it landed back on Kavira's face. She let out a tiny, fractured sigh, her head rolling against his shoulder. I have you now, he murmured into the blonde highlights of her hair, his voice a promise of both safety and vengeance. No one will ever turn a back to you again. The elevator doors hissed open, revealing a world of gold, silk, and waiting doctors. The king had returned, and he had brought his future with him. The first thing Kavira felt was the warmth. It wasn't the fleeting, desperate heat of a sidewalk vent or the lukewarm radiator of her old apartment. It was a deep, enveloping luxury that smelled of expensive linen and sterilized air. For a moment, she feared she had died in the snow, and this was merely the transition. She kept her eyes closed, afraid that if she opened them, the golden haze behind her eyelids would shatter and return her to the biting wind of the Seoul streets. Slowly, the sounds of the room began to register. The rhythmic, reassuring beep of a heart monitor. The soft rustle of silk. The quiet, hushed tones of voices speaking in rapid, professional Korean. Her temperature is stabilizing, a woman whispered. The fetal heart rate is strong. They are both incredibly lucky. Lucky. The word felt heavy in Kavira's mind. She didn't feel lucky. She felt broken, discarded by the man who was supposed to be her anchor. She remembered the door slamming. She remembered the look of disgust on Marcus's face as he chose a party over the mother of his supposed child. Her hand moved instinctively toward her stomach, her fingers brushing against a gown of incredibly soft, high-thread count cotton. She's waking up, another voice said. Kavira forced her eyes open. The ceiling was a vast expanse of polished wood and recessed amber lighting. As her vision cleared, she realized she wasn't in a hospital. The room was too opulent, the furniture too heavy and dark. She was in a fortress of gold and shadow. 3 medical professionals in white coats stood at the foot of her bed, but they weren't the ones who commanded the room. Her gaze drifted to the corner, where a tall silhouette stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights of Seoul twinkled behind him like fallen stars, but he remained in the dark. Tae-sung was still wearing his black turtleneck, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked like a statue carved from obsidian, motionless and terrifying. Kavira tried to sit up, a soft moan escaping her lips as her stiff muscles protested. Don't move, the man in the shadows commanded. His voice was a low vibration that seemed to pull the very air from her lungs. The doctors quickly stepped back as Tae-sung approached the bed. The light finally hit his face, revealing the sharp, lethal lines of his jaw and the intensity in his dark eyes. There was a raw, primal energy radiating from him, a mixture of relief and of violence that was being held back by a very thin thread. Where am I? Kavira whispered, her voice raspy. Why did you bring me here? Tae-sung reached out. For a split second, Kavira flinched, a habit born from months of Marcus's unpredictable temper. Tae-sung's hand paused in midair, his expression flickering with a brief, sharp pain before his face returned to a mask of stone. He gently tucked a stray strand of her blonde highlighted hair behind her ear. His touch was unexpectedly warm, his thumb lingering against her temple. You are in the only place in this city where you are safe, he said. Kavira looked at the doctors, then back at him. My boyfriend. Marcus. He's going to be looking for me. Tae-sung's eyes darkened, turning a shade of black that promised a slow and painful end for anyone who crossed him. The man who left a pregnant woman to freeze while he drank champagne is no longer a concern of yours, Kavira. He doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. And he certainly doesn't deserve to be mentioned in this room. He lowered his hand to the swell of her stomach, his palm covering the exact spot where the baby had kicked in the car. He didn't ask for permission. He claimed the space with the authority of a king. I know whose child this is, Kavira, he murmured, leaning closer until she could smell the faint scent of sandalwood and power. You thought you could hide my heir in the shadows of a man like that? You thought I wouldn't find what belongs to me? Kavira's breath hitched. The secret she had carried like a shield was gone. She was no longer a woman alone in the cold. She was the vessel for a legacy she didn't fully understand, trapped within a golden fortress built by the most dangerous man in Korea. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the soft, mechanical hum of the medical equipment. Tae-sung remained perfectly still, his large hand still resting with proprietary weight over Kavira's stomach. The heat from his palm seemed to penetrate through the layers of fabric, grounding Kavira even as her heart raced with a mixture of fear and a strange, buried hope. She looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that the man she had spent one fleeting, intense summer with was not a man at all. He was a force of nature. I didn't think you'd want to be found, Kavira whispered, her voice gaining a tiny bit of strength. I saw who you were in the news. The stories people tell. I thought a life with me would be a weakness for you. Tae-sung's eyes flashed, a brief flicker of raw emotion breaking through his ironclad composure. A weakness? He stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the silk sheets until it reached her chin. You thought my own flesh and blood, the only thing in this world that is truly mine, would be a weakness? He leaned down, his face inches from hers. Kavira could see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes and the absolute, unwavering certainty in his gaze. I have spent my life building walls so high that no one can climb them, he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly silk. I have shed blood to ensure that nothing I value can be touched. And yet, I find the woman carrying my future freezing on a sidewalk because she was too proud to call my name. I wasn't proud, Kavira countered, a spark of her old fire returning. I was protecting him. I didn't want him raised in a world of guns and shadows. Tae-sung let out a short, dark laugh that didn't reach his eyes. And so you gave him to a coward who leaves his family in a blizzard? You chose a slow death in the snow over a life of power? Look around you, Kavira. He swept a hand toward the vast, opulent room, the high-tech medical monitors, and the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the empire he ruled. From this moment on, the rules have changed. You will never again wonder where your next meal is coming from. You will never again stand outside a door waiting for a man to notice you. And my son, or my daughter? He paused, his fingers tensing slightly against her belly, as if he could already feel the weight of the crown he would one day pass down. My heir will never know what it feels like to be cold. They will never know the hunger or the fear that you carried tonight. I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let a single snowflake land on their skin without my permission. Kavira felt a tear escape, hot and fast, tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of the overwhelming realization that she was no longer alone in her struggle. The burden of the child, which she had carried like a secret sin for months, was now being shared by a man who could move mountains. What happens to me? She asked softly. Am I just the vessel for your heir? Tae-sung reached out, his thumb catching the tear and brushing it away with a tenderness that contradicted his lethal reputation. He looked at her blonde highlighted hair, her dark skin glowing under the amber lights, and the diamond ring she still wore, a ring he realized Marcus hadn't even given her. "You are the woman who survived the night," he murmured. "You are the one who kept my legacy alive when the world tried to snuff it out. You aren't just a vessel, Kavira. You are mine. And in my world, what is mine is untouchable." He straightened up, the mask of the Mafia King sliding back into place as he turned toward the door. "Rest now. The doctors will stay. My men are at every exit. Tomorrow, we begin the process of making sure the world knows exactly who you are." As he walked out, the heavy doors clicking shut behind him, Kavira lay back against the pillows. She was a prisoner in a golden palace, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she could finally breathe. The days that followed were a blur of quiet luxury and clinical precision. Kavira transitioned from the medical suite to the main living quarters of the penthouse, a space that felt less like a home and more like a high-altitude sanctuary. The walls were lined with dark, polished wood and original art, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seoul that made the city look like a toy box under the winter sky. Everywhere she turned, there were silent, stone-faced men in sharp suits who bowed as she passed, not out of politeness, but out of a deep, ingrained fear of the man who had placed her there. Kavira found herself constantly shrinking away from their gaze. She walked with her shoulders hunched, her hands clasped nervously over her belly, and she never asked for anything. When a maid brought her a tray of food, Kavira would apologize for the trouble. When a guard stepped aside to let her pass, she would whisper a frantic thank you, her eyes fixed on the floor. Taesung watched her. He watched from the shadows of his office, from the head of the long obsidian dining table, and from the balcony as the snow continued to fall. He saw the way she carried her trauma like a heavy cloak, still expecting a blow that would never come. One evening, he found her in the library, staring at a shelf of books but not touching them. She looked small against the vastness of the room, her blonde highlights shimmering under the soft amber lamps. "Why haven't you asked for anything?" Taesung asked, his voice cutting through the silence. "No clothes, no jewelry, no specific foods. You live here like a ghost." Kavira turned, startled. "I don't want to be a burden," she said softly, the old habit slipping out before she could stop it. "You've already done so much. The doctors, the room. I don't want to take up more space than I have to." Taesung walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the thick Persian rug. He stopped just inches away, his presence overwhelming. "You think you are a guest here, Kavira? Or perhaps a prisoner?" I don't know what I am," she whispered. Taesung reached out, his hand firm as he tilted her chin upward, forcing her to look into his dark, uncompromising eyes. "In this city, people kill for a fraction of what you represent. You are carrying the future of the Taesung line. You are not a burden to be managed. You are the most protected asset in this country." He let his hand drop to her shoulder, his grip grounding her. "Marcus taught you that your value was tied to how little you required. He taught you to be small so he could feel large. That is a lie. Here, your value is absolute. If you want the moon, I will find a way to pull it from the sky. If you are hungry at 3 in the morning, a dozen chefs will compete to serve you." Kavira shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. "It's too much. I'm just a woman who got caught in the snow." "No," Taesung corrected, his voice a low, vibrating growl. "You are the woman who survived. You are the woman I chose." He led her to the window, pointing down at the glowing lights of the city far below. "Do you see those lights? Every one of them represents a person who answers to me. And every one of them knows that if so much as a hair on your head is harmed, I will not rest until their world is ash. You aren't taking up space, Kavira. You own it." He turned her to face a tall, silver-framed mirror on the wall. Look at yourself, he commanded. Kavira looked. She saw a woman whose skin was regaining its glow, whose pregnancy made her look regal rather than fragile, and whose eyes were beginning to lose the haunted look of the streets. Stop apologizing for breathing, Tae-sung murmured, leaning down so his breath warmed her ear. Start realizing that you are the only person in this world I would kneel for. As he walked away, leaving her standing before her own reflection, Kavira felt a strange, new warmth spreading through her chest. It wasn't just the heat of the penthouse. It was the realization that for the first time in her life, she didn't have to earn her place. She was already exactly where she was meant to be. The peace of the penthouse was shattered not by a sound, but by a shift in the atmosphere. Tae-sung had been away for several hours, attending to business that he never discussed with Kavira, leaving her in the company of the silent guards and the hum of the city below. She was resting on the sofa, her hand over her stomach, watching the snow dance against the glass, when the heavy doors of the foyer opened. She expected Tae-sung's rhythmic, heavy tread. Instead, she heard a voice that made her blood turn to ice, a voice that belonged to a cold sidewalk and a slammed door. I know she's in here. You can't keep her from me. She's my girlfriend. Kavira stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs. Marcus was in the foyer, looking disheveled and frantic. He was being held back by two of Tae-sung's men, their faces like stone as they blocked his path. Marcus wasn't there out of love. His eyes were darting around the room, taking in the original artwork, the silk curtains, and the sheer wealth that dripped from the ceiling. Kavira, he shouted when he saw her. There you are? I've been looking everywhere. I didn't mean what I said that night, baby. I was just stressed. Come on, let's go home. Kavira stayed behind the safety of a heavy marble table. I am home, Marcus. And you didn't look for me. You left me to die. Marcus's face twisted, his false concern slipping. Don't be dramatic. Look, some guy told me you were here with some rich businessman. I'm not even mad. But if he wants to keep you, he needs to compensate the man who's been taking care of you for a year. You're mine, remember? You're worth a lot of money to me. Is that all I am to you? Kavira whispered, her voice shaking. A paycheck? You're a pregnant woman with nowhere else to go. Marcus sneered, stepping toward her. I'm the only one who. The only one who what? The voice came from the doorway, low and vibrating with a lethal energy. Tae-sung stepped into the room, his black overcoat still dusted with snow. He didn't look at Kavira. His eyes were locked on Marcus. The two guards immediately stepped back, bowing so low their foreheads nearly touched their knees. Marcus turned, his chest puffed out in a display of false bravado. Who are you? I'm here for my woman. If you want her, we can settle this with a check. I know how things work. Tae-sung walked slowly into the center of the room. He didn't shout. He didn't even look angry. He looked like a predator who had found a particularly pathetic piece of prey. He stopped inches from Marcus, looming over him with the weight of a mountain. You think this is a transaction? Tae-sung asked, his voice a terrifyingly soft silk. You think you can put a price on the woman who carries my blood? The woman you shoved into a blizzard because she was embarrassing? Marcus paled, his eyes widening as he finally recognized the man standing before him. The realization of who Tae-sung was, and what he was capable of, hit him like a physical blow. I didn't know. I thought she was just. Tae-sung reached out, his hand moving so fast Marcus didn't have time to flinch. He gripped Marcus by the throat, lifting him until his toes barely touched the Persian rug. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Marcus's desperate, choking gasps. You left her in the cold, Tae-sung whispered, leaning in close. You insulted her heart, and now, you come into my home to sell her back to me. Tae-sung's eyes turned a shade of black that promised no mercy. I should let the cold finish what you started. I should have my men drop you in the Han River tonight. But Kavira is watching, and I will not stain her home with the blood of something as insignificant as you." He shoved Marcus toward the door, where the guards caught him like a sack of trash. "Take him," Tae-sung commanded. "Make sure he understands that if he ever speaks her name again, if he even thinks of her, he will simply cease to exist. No trace, no memory." Marcus was dragged out, his pleas for mercy echoing down the hallway until the heavy doors clicked shut. Tae-sung stood still for a moment, calming the violence in his veins before he turned to Kavira. He walked over to her, his expression softening as he reached out to cup her face. "Are you all right?" Kavira leaned into his touch, the last of her fear melting away. "I'm fine," she whispered. "I wasn't afraid. I knew you would come." "I will always come for you," he promised, his thumb brushing over her lips. "The past is gone, Kavira. He was a shadow. I am the sun." The silence following Marcus's departure felt different than the cold emptiness of the streets. It was a heavy, protective quiet that seemed to pulse with Tae-sung's heartbeat. He didn't move away from Kavira immediately. Instead, he led her toward the large, velvet armchair by the fireplace, the orange flames casting flickering shadows across the room. He sat on the edge of the hearth, his long legs folded, looking not like a king on a throne, but like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Kavira watched him, her hand resting on the swell of her stomach. She could see the tension in his jaw, the way his knuckles were white as he gripped his knees. "Why did you let me go, Tae-sung?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper above the crackle of the wood. "That summer, you vanished. I thought I was just a distraction. I thought you had moved on to someone who fit your world better." Tae-sung didn't look up at first. He stared into the fire, his dark eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "I didn't move on, Kavira. I went into hiding. Not from my enemies, but from what you were doing to me." He finally looked at her, and for the first time, the lethal mask was gone. In its place was a raw, terrifying honesty. "In my world, love isn't a gift. It's a target. I have spent 30 years making sure I had nothing to lose. No family, no deep roots, no one who could be used to make me crawl. And then I met you." He reached out, his fingers brushing the hem of her black coat. "You were so bright. You didn't know who I was, and for a few months, I could pretend I was just a man. But the more I looked at you, the more I realized that you were the only thing in this city that could actually destroy me. If someone found out about you, they wouldn't have to kill me. They would just have to hurt you, and I would give them everything I've built just to see you smile again." Kavira felt a lump form in her throat. All this time, she had felt abandoned, never realizing she had been the sun around which his entire gravity revolved. "I thought by leaving, I was keeping you safe," he continued, his voice dropping to a gravelly low. "I told myself that a life with a man like Marcus, someone small, someone invisible, would be safer for you than a life with me. I thought the cold of my world would eventually kill the warmth in you. I didn't realize that by leaving you, I was handing you over to a different kind of winter." He stood up and knelt before her, placing both hands on the arms of her chair, effectively surrounding her with his presence. "When I saw you in the snow that night, my heart stopped. I realized that my plan had failed. You were still in danger, and you were alone. I swore then that I would never make that mistake again." He leaned in, his forehead resting gently against hers. "You are my only true weakness, Kavira. You and the child you carry. But I've realized that I don't want to be strong without you. I would rather be vulnerable with you by my side than a god in a lonely tower." Kavira reached out, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. She realized then that his power didn't come from the men in suits or the black cars. It came from the fierce, absolute way he chose to protect what was his. "I'm not afraid of your world anymore," she murmured. "You should be." he whispered back, his eyes searching hers. But you don't have to be brave. That's my job. Your job is to stay warm. Your job is to let me be the wall between you and the wind. In that moment, the golden fortress didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a home. The king had confessed his greatest secret, and in doing so, he had given Kavira the one thing she had always searched for, a place where she was truly, irrevocably wanted. The sky over Seoul had turned a bruised, violent purple, and the blizzard had transformed from a dance into a war. Heavy drifts of snow pounded against the reinforced glass of the penthouse, the wind howling like a wounded beast. Inside, the lights flickered once, then twice, before the backup generators kicked in with a low, vibrating hum. Kavira sat in the library, her hands gripped tightly over her stomach as a sudden, sharp intuition made the hair on her neck stand up. The silence of the penthouse, usually so comforting, now felt like a held breath. Tae-sung had been on a call in the hallway when the first explosion rocked the lower levels. The vibration shuddered through the floor, rattling the crystal decanters on the sideboard. Kavira, get to the panic room. Now, Tae-sung's voice sliced through the sudden chaos, no longer a silk growl, but a thunderous command. He appeared in the doorway, a sleek, matte-black handgun already in his hand. His eyes were cold, scanning the shadows beyond the windows. Outside, dark shapes were descending from the roof on silent cables. Men who had used the cover of the storm to bypass the street-level security. They were a rival faction, desperate enough to strike at the king's heart while the city was paralyzed by ice. "I'm not leaving you," Kavira said, her voice trembling but her feet rooted to the spot. "You have the Heir," Tae-sung snapped, his gaze briefly softening as it landed on her belly. "My life is irrelevant. Theirs is everything. Go." Before she could move, the floor-to-ceiling glass in the dining room shattered under a tactical charge. Glass shards flew like diamonds through the air, and masked men began to swarm through the breach. Tae-sung moved with a lethal, terrifying grace, his weapon barking in the dim light. He became a shadow among shadows, a storm more violent than the one raging outside. Kavira turned to run toward the reinforced suite, but a man in a gray tactical vest cut her off, his boots crunching on the glass. He lunged for her, his eyes fixed on her throat. In that moment, the woman who had apologized for breathing vanished. Kavira didn't scream for help. She didn't shrink into a corner. She remembered Tae-sung's words, that she owned this space, that she was an asset, not a burden. As the attacker reached for her, Kavira grabbed a heavy, bronze bust from a nearby pedestal. With a strength born of primal maternal instinct, she swung it with everything she had. The metal connected with the man's temple, and he crumpled to the floor with a heavy thud. She didn't stop to breathe. She scrambled into the panic room, her hand hovering over the heavy steel door. Through the gap, she saw Tae-sung pinned behind a marble pillar, two men closing in on his flank. He was fast, but he was outnumbered. Kavira's eyes landed on the remote security console inside the room. With shaking fingers, she remembered the codes Tae-sung had shown her just in case. She slammed her palm onto the emergency depressurization and fire suppression icons for the main hall. A hiss of blinding white chemical fog filled the room, disorienting the attackers and masking Tae-sung's movements. In the confusion, Tae-sung finished the remaining men with surgical precision. The room went silent again, save for the whistling wind through the broken window and the heavy thuds of falling bodies. Tae-sung approached the panic room door, his chest heaving, his face splattered with a dark crimson that wasn't his. He looked at Kavira, who stood there with the bronze bust still clutched in her hand, her eyes wide and fierce. He reached out, his bloody glove stopping an inch from her face as if he feared he would stain her. "You stayed," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard before, pride. "I protected what's mine," Kavira replied, her voice finally steady. Taesung stepped into the room and pulled her into his chest, his heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ear. The blizzard continued to scream outside, but the siege was over. Kavira had found her voice, not in the quiet of the penthouse, but in the heat of the fire. She was no longer just the woman he saved. She was the woman who had fought beside him. The bite of winter had finally retreated, replaced by the soft, fragrant breath of a soul spring. The cherry blossoms were beginning to drift through the air like pink snow, but unlike the frozen white flakes of months ago, these held the promise of life and new beginnings. High above the city, on the expansive marble balcony of the penthouse, the air was warm and still. Kavira stood at the railing, her long dark hair, now shimmering with healthy blonde highlights, cascading over a soft silk robe. In her arms, she held a small, sleeping bundle wrapped in cream-colored cashmere. Her son, the Taesung heir, had arrived 2 weeks prior, entering the world with a roar that matched his father's intensity. Looking down at his peaceful face, Kavira felt a sense of wholeness so profound it made the memory of that Christmas night feel like a nightmare from a past life. The heavy glass doors slid open behind her, and the familiar, grounding scent of sandalwood announced his arrival. Taesung stepped onto the balcony, his black overcoat replaced by a simple dark shirt, his expression softening the moment his eyes landed on his family. He moved with a quiet grace, sliding his arm around Kavira's waist and drawing her back against his chest. "He's quiet today," Taesung murmured, leaning down to press a kiss to the side of Kavira's neck. "He's a king," Kavira replied with a playful smile, leaning into his strength. "He knows he's already won." Taesung's hand covered hers on the railing, his large palm engulfing her fingers. On her hand, the old diamond ring had been replaced by a band of rare black diamonds and gold, a symbol of her status as the woman beside the king. He looked out over the sprawling city below, the same streets that had once swallowed her whole. From this height, the cars looked like pebbles and the people like ants. The city no longer felt like a predator. It felt like a kingdom. "Do you remember what you said?" Kavira asked, her voice steady and clear. "About me being a weakness?" Taesung turned her in his arms, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that still made her heart skip. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice a low, reverent silk. "You aren't the weakness. You are the reason for the strength. Everything I've built, it was all just a foundation for this moment. For you. For him." Kavira looked out at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set in a riot of orange and purple. She remembered the woman who had stood outside the lunar lounge, shivering and invisible, begging for a crumb of affection from a man who didn't deserve her. She thought of the hunger, the fear, and the cold that had nearly claimed her. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who no longer shrank to make others feel big. She was no longer an outsider in a foreign land. She was the heart of an empire. She had been thrown out on a snowy Christmas night, left to perish in the dark, but in that darkness, she had found the one man who could see her true worth. She hadn't just survived the winter, she had conquered it. Taesung pulled the edge of his coat around her shoulders, shielding her from the light evening breeze, though she didn't really need the warmth anymore. She was complete. "You're mine," he whispered, the same promise he had made every day since he found her. "And the world belongs to you." Kavira looked at her son, then up at the man who would burn the world to keep them safe, and finally closed her eyes, breathing in the sweet scent of spring. The cold was gone. The winter was over. And for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The end. Thanks for watching. If you love this, then you'll love what's coming up next. Like, share, and subscribe so that you don't miss any of my story. Check out the channel for more African Korean stories.